In northeast Wyoming, roughly halfway between the Bighorn Mountains and the Black Hills, is the city of Gillette. Well, to be honest, calling Gillette a city is a bit optimistic, but with the current population of 33,500, it's the third largest town in Wyoming, believe it or not. On the edge of town, where the houses give way to the rolling high prairie hills, you'll find Church at the Barn. This is the home base for Mike Morrison Ministries, also known as Triple M, as well as two other area ministries. Today, I'll be debuting the channel by visiting with Mike in the Church at the Barn. Welcome to the first ever interview of Church in the Wild, and this being our premiere video. If it looks like amateur hour, there's a reason for it. I thought it only fitting to start my series of interviews with Mike Morrison, who is not only a brother in the Lord, he's my actual brother, and precedes me in ministry. Yes, get that straight right off the get-go. And first off, Merry Christmas. This is Christmas 2024.
Yeah, you too.
Thank you. Well, let's start out with the name. Because when we started, it was Saturday Night Life, or...
Yeah. I started teaching Bible studies at ranch houses, community centers in little towns, little small places. Once in a while would be in a church in a small town because that's the only place there was to meet. But we called it Mike. It is officially Mike Morrison Ministries, and then AKA Triple M. And we used Triple M because we supported a lot of things, and people wanted a name that, and we didn't want to blow the horn at that, so we just used Triple M. And then as time went on, a Bible study in Gillette became a church, because the people coming to the Bible study wanted a church that didn't argue with what they were learning in the Bible study from the pulpit. And so we started the church in my shop. And well, the Bible study was in my house. It got so big we moved to the shop. Then we had 50 chairs on the floor in the shop, I remember, and people standing in there most of the time. So we started building a barn that I knew we wouldn't be able to continue on that property, but we built it because we only went as we had the money to go. So we had the money to build a barn, and that was Morrison Pumping Service built the barn for me. But we had church in it, with the idea to be a horse barn when we built the church. Well, one thing led to another and evolved, and we wound up in this building right here. I don't intend to build a bigger building. I would like to see a church service going on in here, morning, afternoon, and evening, 7 days a week.
Mm-hmm. There's actually two other ministries in this building. I'll go ahead and let you introduce those.
You probably know more about both the other two than I do.
The Gillette Healing Rooms meets here on Thursday nights.
The ministry out of Spokane that came as a result of John G. Lake's ministry.
Right. Mm-hmm. And City Church, which is the church that I pastor, meets here on Friday nights. And we're very appreciative of the use of the building, because we couldn't afford the place where we were at. Our congregation is way small. And this is a very nice building, and it's important to remember that even as nice as this building is, this thing would be considered small by most people's standards. It's a good sized space for Gillette, Wyoming. Not so much if you were talking Denver, Colorado, or someplace like that.
I've had to remind a lot of people, that the state of Wyoming population is about the size of Lubbock, Texas.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about a community in Wyoming, Gillette pulls on 50,000 people, but it's a 120-mile circle it's pulling on to get that many. So there's not a lot of big churches anywhere in this part.
Exactly. And going back to the original barn, that's where my wife Valerie and I got married in there. Talk about the floors, the original floors in there.
Well, I planned on that. I built that building. We had church in it. I planned on it being a horse barn when I got done, because Sherry and I raised and trained a lot of horses, and so over the course of time, the wood floor I put in there, the plank floor, got mold, and that wouldn't work. So I had to take it out, pour concrete. I didn't want to stand horses on the concrete.
Right, and the planks were milled in Ridge, Montana. Is that right?
Yeah, just raw lumber planks.
Green, very green.
Yeah. I did. Had I known anything about what I was doing, I probably would have used something treated. But
when we started, we put the floors in. There was a gap about that big between the boards, and as they shrunk over the years,
got a big gap.
You can get that pretty good size.
Yeah, that didn't take very long. I think that floor only lasted 4 or 5 years. We were only in there 8 or 9.
Mm-hmm. So describe how you got into ministry. How do you go from being a Montana farm boy to the oil patch of Gillette, Wyoming, with a small stint at John Brown University in Arkansas, to full-time ministry?
Well, I think it would be the easiest probably to start when the year I turned 27. I had with my wisdom, got myself in a real bind. A 27-year-old kid, I owed $450,000 of signature notes that I had borrowed from friends of mine, pretty much in town. And I was staring bankruptcy in the face. At 27, that would have been 1978. And I didn't want to do that. And then Sherry and I, our son was 9 months old and dying, basically. We found out he needed surgery. And, but while we were finding out, we needed healing's what he needed. And some other things going wrong. My whole world was coming apart at the seams. And I bought a satellite television along about that same time, those great big old discs. I had one of the first ones in the county. And you had to go out and crank them by hand and have somebody in the house hollering at you when you got it lined up right. And anyway, for the first week I had that, I heard Kenneth Copeland doing his satellite broadcast. I heard Kenneth Copeland say that if you have a need, God will meet it. And that got my attention because I had plenty of needs. And I started listening to him, and within 10 minutes of his 30-minute broadcast, I could tell he was teaching things I'd never heard before. And I grew up in church, and I had never heard any of that stuff. Within a week, I just said right out loud, I was so frustrated. Why didn't somebody teach this to me while I was in church? And God said, you could have rode the First thing I ever heard God say, you could have read the Bible yourself, could have read the New Testament yourself, and you'd know it. And that's put the problem right back on
Right.
me. He took it instead of blaming everybody else. Truly, anybody that doesn't know God as their Lord, their boss that they walk with throughout the course of every day, it's their own fault. It's in the Bible. And it's not hard to read.
Right.
Most people just don't ever get around to reading any of it, let alone a little bit of it. So I did, and was on my way. And Kenneth showed me what the Bible said about finances, and I was able to believe God, and He turned that debt that was enormous at that time, $400,000. Now I don't know what that would be in today's dollars, but it was a lot of money for a 27-year-old kid for sure. And God had that turned around. I remember the day that I broke even, where I had enough assets to pay off the money I still had left. So I could, if I wanted to, I could sell out and be even. It was like somebody pulled a semi off of me, and I could breathe again. And it wasn't long after that we were completely out of debt. So and that was all God, all Bible, all standing on the promises. I was a horrible money manager, obviously, and never got any better at it. I'm no better at it now than I was then, because I'm not interested.
I think that's a Morrison trait, actually.
Well, I'm not interested in being an investor. I'm interested in giving money. If you give, God will give back to you, pressed down, shaken together, running over. If you're a tither, the windows of heaven are open over your house. If you give offerings, there's a multiplied return coming back. And you can't outgive God. You can outspend what you've given, and that's where I made my mistake. But you can't outgive God. So if you get people in financial trouble, should up their giving, not cut it back. And over the years after that, having the same bad habits I always had, I had plenty of opportunity to practice that, and it worked very well. If I overspent, I just started giving more. I learned enough about using my faith in the promises of God that the older you get, the more you need other things that you didn't need at 27 years old. Every decade, the things you thought you wanted, you don't want anymore. And you didn't see coming in the next decade what you want. The longer you live, the more practice faith in what God promised switches from needs in the material world, and they switch over to just staying alive, just being healthy.
How did you get into teaching the Bible studies? And I know there was somebody that you met at some point in time.
I opened my big mouth to God one day is what happened. I was somewhere between Highway 59 and the Cheyenne River. And when you get down in that country, you can be 15, 20 miles from another human being and stay that way all day long. And I told God, this is so good, and I'm so thankful for you showing it to me. It's not exactly how I said, but it's close. I'll show these I'd show these other guys if you want me to. And it wasn't 2 or 3 days when I run into a guy. I'd never run into anybody. I'd run into a guy out there, and he was having a bad day. And he said, boy, I wish I knew. And he asked a Bible question. And I said, well, here's what the Bible said about it. And I had my Bible with me, and I had the Bible with duct tape on it, so it looked like all my other field books, because I didn't want them guys knowing I was reading the Bible when I first started reading it. And but I was out there reading the Bible for 7-8 years before this happened. And this was in the mid-'80s, late 80s. When I said that, I answered his Bible question, and he asked another one, and I found in the Word what the Bible said about it. And he said, would you tell, he said, I got a friend that needs to hear that. Would you tell him? I said, well, yeah. So we set up a time, and he brought 2 friends. So I had a Bible study with 3 guys from the oil field, and I just showed them in the Bible the answer to their questions. And that's pretty much the start. That first Bible study I did with those guys was a start. And then they'd tell friends that told their friends that told their friends. We're just having these little Bible studies here, there, and everywhere. I wasn't doing it. I had no intention of going in. Never thought about being a minister. Never crossed my mind. I just doing what I told God I'd do. If I could show somebody else what He showed me, I would do it. And so I was doing it, so it just grew. And at the same time, Glenn Smith, who's an evangelist out of Texas, found out I could sing, and I could sing Western style gospel music. And he wanted me singing at all his meetings that he did up here. And he happened to be a friend of Kenneth Copeland's. And when I heard that, I was all in, because I had been listening to Kenneth on TV and on tape, and anybody Kenneth recommended. So Kenneth said he'd had connections with Oral Roberts. So I was in on that. He had connection with Rhema.
Kenneth Hagin.
Kenneth Hagin, thank you. And so I got all Kenneth Hagin's books, because Kenneth Copeland said he read all of Kenneth Hagin's books. So I got them all, and I didn't just read them. I highlighted them and read them and read them and read them, and looked the Bible verses up and read before, into it, and through it. And I was a serious Bible student from the age of 27 to, I think I was probably 46 or 7 when those guys asked me to show them something in the Word. So, and then once I started doing that, it just started to grow. And it was just Bible studies. That's all I ever wanted to do. I never intended to do anything else. They got so big eventually, and I was doing so many of them, and I was pumping so many oil wells, and I was at 20, in my 20s, I could work 24 hours a day without sleep. I did it often, and it didn't bother me. I didn't really think about it. In the 30s, I was looking for a little nap once in a while. And when I got in my 40s, I could see this isn't going to work. I'm going to have to cut the ministry down, or I'm going to have to cut the oil business down. I'm going to have to do something.
Now, to give you an idea, when he says doing Bible studies, I went with him on one Bible study, and I had just flown in from Miami, Florida at a conference that I was at for a week. So I was in the most densely populated area of the United States, or one of them. And Mike says, "You want to go do a Bible study with me?" Sure. So we get in the truck and we head north out of town, and then we turn at Weston, which is the last pavement we saw for 100 and some miles, into Ridge, Montana, which goes into some of the most remote, sparsely populated area of the United States you're ever going to run into.
It's there aren't many people out there.
And that was that just their family?
No, it was at their house. There were, that Bible study used to run anywhere from, it depends on how early it was. Brutal cold up in that country in the winter. And there were cold winters. This was in the, early on in the ministry, the 80s. And, but we would get, some days, they started in a community center that only had outdoor toilets, and
I think that's where we did the Bible study.
That's probably one you got to, and the women wouldn't come at 30 below, and I don't blame them, but the men would, and God aimed my ministry at men anyway. So we had we had, you might have been at one of those cold ones. They'd wear insulated coveralls, and then
it was November. I remember that right around Thanksgiving.
we put wood in a wood stove at that community hall, which was just an old house without any insulation in it. So when you get the heater fired up, the hornets would come alive, and the hornets would start coming out of the ceiling. There'd be hornets flying all over the room, and the one guy'd bring his kids, and they were different. They boys, and they were all different ages of little, and they'd run between my legs while I was teaching. And we had some great Bible studies. The questions, those guys that were in love with the Word, and they just asked good questions. I think that's why I invited you to that. Was one of the funnest ones I did.
And then, of course, you, as the years progressed, or maybe even then you were doing that, but you're going even further afield into Bozeman and that area.
We got as far steady Bible studies at least once a month. We had one outside North Platte, Nebraska, in a rodeo arena. We had one. We had several in Montana in different venues. Pig Barn in Bozeman, the Pig Barn at the fairgrounds, was a round sail ring, big sail ring, and it was a great place to have cowboy church. And we did that once a month for several years running.
How'd you get to Australia?
Glenn Smith, that ordained me into the ministry, ordained a Australian into the ministry, a saddle bronc rider from Australia, just about the same time, and we met each other just at that time, early 90s. It was when we met, and he's doing in Australia the same thing I was doing here, and he didn't realize how wild this country that we live in is. He lived on the edge of the outback, and he thought it was the edge of the world. And really, the outback, we don't have anything
that quite
compares to that here. But
North Central Montana.
But the edge of it, where he lived, we were actually more sparsely populated than he was right there at his house, his ranch. So we were doing the same thing. So we got to be very close friends real quick. Just one of those things where it clicks. And we've been friends ever since. And he did a Bible school and had Glenn teach it. And then he and Glenn invited me to teach the subject of faith in the Bible school. It was a Bible college type school for high school graduates. And so I did. Taught 4 hours with a 10-minute break between the hours for 7 days on faith. Actually, I guess it was 5 days. Then they had a meeting for me to do every night while I was there in a church, little churches somewhere in there. And then we did some other ministry work on top of that. So it was a whirlwind visit.
Needless to say, when you were first doing Bible studies in the oil patch, you probably never envisioned that happening.
No, I didn't envision that. And then I got to running so far, so often, that God told me you'll need an airplane. And so I learned how to fly a light airplane in a record amount of time, and put 1,100 hours of ministry trips on light airplanes. I had 3 of them before it was through. And back and forth to Texas. We did a lot of cowboy churches in Texas, and pretty far into western Montana. And that's why I was able to get to past North Platte, Nebraska. And we had Bible studies we were invited to that we did 2 or 3 times that never really turned into a church, but several of these turned into churches. So, we have a church that started from those Bible studies in Bozeman that moved to south of Livingston in the mountains on the way up into Yellowstone, and it's still blowing up there. So Yeah, little communities. They need
and
quality
you're still
work
going
too.
out there to Montana quite a bit.
Yeah. We go to the Barnchin in Harleton, Montana, once every other month, 6 times a year now. And we go back and visit some of the other places also. We've been going to Lewistown, Montana in the summertime every other month that we're not at.
Describe the congregation. What is the demographic, if you will, of who you reach with your ministry?
Well, it started out by the time I was ordained in the ministry, mid '90s. We were, I would say, we ran 2 men for every female. There's 2 males for every female. The average age was probably 25 to 35, and it's interesting over the decades to see how congregations change if the same minister stays in the front, because people grow up with them, and so now I'd say the ministry is more 50-50. It's not so lopsided male, and it's more, the age is probably more between 50 and 85. So, but the message hasn't changed. And I still remember God told me one of the first actual church services that I did, there was he told me to imagine a 75-year-old cowboy sitting in the back row, and that's who you want to understand what you're talking about every meeting. See him in every meeting. And so God aimed me at cowboys, and he said, the older ones, if you can get through to them, you can get through to anybody. and that's exactly right, because those guys learned how to be drug into church and shut everything off and just chill out till they could get out of there, and they just learned how not to listen. So to get to a person that's in that condition, you have to say some pretty outrageous things. And when you get a hold of their attention, they're like a fresh piece of paper. You can just start writing, and you got lots of room, and you can build anything that God wants you to build. And so, with that in mind, and God instructed me to operate like that, there's just a lot of churched people who grew up in church that can't handle that kind of blunt way of talking from the pulpit. And that's okay. God didn't put me in the ministry to get Christians to come learn something they already know, or to change from where they fit in and where He's plugged them into to go somewhere else. I never wanted to, and never ever want to do that. That's why we started in Gillette. I wouldn't even do Sunday morning church. We did Saturday night church because I didn't want to pull away from anybody else's churches.
Thank you for watching Church in the Wild. Do you have or participate in a small ministry? If so, I'd love to hear from you. Just email the address in the description below and tell me about your ministry. While you're at it, please click the like and subscribe buttons to be alerted when new content is uploaded to the channel. Until then, may the Lord bless and keep you. The Lord make His face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up His countenance upon you and give you peace.